this story here about Cenk Uygur and Briahna Joy Gray talking about basically how the left should move forward if they should continue to try to reform the Democratic Party. And then also this measure of force the vote. Yes, people are still talking about force the vote because it was a point in time where we really could have gotten something, right? We could have seen how people were going to vote, and that would have revealed their hand. And then what you do is you get candidates to primary challenge those people who voted against Medicare for all, and you get their ass out of office. That was the whole plan. Apparently, all of a sudden now, Cenk doesn't seem to remember what the strategy was. He's on rising line. Bree obviously checked him, but let's get started with the first part of the discussion, which is about whether or not people should start to support third party, et cetera, or continue to fight within the Democratic Party. And also, Cenk just wrote a new book called Justice is Coming. Let's get into it.
But he keeps trying to bring the left over to the right wing. That's not how you do it. You say, look, it's not that you guys are moving your position or that we're moving our position. It's just that we're finding common ground in the places where we agree. Both of us can take yes for an answer, but you should not sheep herd your audience to the right wing. That is not at all productive. Now, in terms of hierarchies, like I said earlier, you don't need a hierarchy. Why do we have to debate and vote on, is this social issue more important or is this economic issue more important? It's not that hard to do both. It's not. So when they pass laws against trans people, gay people, etc., in these states, when they pass the law saying we shouldn't teach real African-American history in Florida, you could fight back against that. And at the same time, hey, Republicans, you know that 3/4 of you agree with us on paid family leave. We'll take yes for an answer. Come on, let's go do paid family leave together. Let's make sure that moms and dads have 12 weeks off after they deliver a baby. And so there's no reason in the world you can't do both. And once you get into hierarchies and prioritizing, that starts internal wars. Oh, you think class is more important than race? Oh, you think race is more important than class? And then all you're doing is fighting when you cannot win on economic issues unless you unite against the establishment. They're the ones that are actually in charge.
So if you're going to unite against the establishment, what Cenk is basically saying there is that you shouldn't try to move leftists to the right. You should try to move the right left on the issues that we agree with. I understand that. What I don't understand is this position here when he says that we should be fighting back against the establishment. But how can we fight back against the establishment if you're still trying to do this within the Democratic Party, which is owned by the establishment? Yeah. It's like me trying to fight back at Chips Ahoy, but I'm still working inside of Nabisco. Like it just, we're not tackling the big tent. We're not tackling the real problem. So just trying to reform the Democratic Party by putting in people, politicians here and there, that doesn't change the system. You're still supporting the establishment. And that's a big part of the problem. So hold on to that piece where he said there about fighting back against the establishment, because that'll be important later on in the discussion.
Speaking of sheep herding, there are some who are over the idea of working within the Democratic Party who see the obstacles to actually winning as insurmountable after Bernie Sanders, who was better positioned than probably any candidate the left is going to have in generations, was thwarted the way he was thwarted by the Democratic Party. And now people are seeing the way the DNC is ostensibly rigging the election in various ways, not having any debates, saying that there will be no primary, changing the order of the primary contest, et cetera, in a way that makes it very difficult for insurgent candidates like Marianne Williamson and RFK Jr. to advance in the polls. As a consequence of all of that, many people on the left are saying, I'm over participating in the Democratic Party entirely, are looking to third-party campaigns like Dr. Cornel West's campaign, and see those who would want folks to participate in any kind of electoral contest within the Democratic Party as doing exactly that, as sheep herding, especially when some of the people who might encourage one to vote for a Democrat ultimately in 2020 or 2016 and probably in 2024 are going to say at the end of the day, you should vote to defeat Trump and vote for the Democrat, even if they don't reflect the progressive values that you've said, and I agree, are so popular. What do you make of that argument?
So she's talking about people like me that says, like, what's the point of this strategy of trying to reform the Democratic Party if at the end of the day, when these people lose, and they will lose, the response is just go ahead and support their establishment opponents because that's better than getting someone on the right. That's me. So I've been saying that for quite some time. And I feel like the progressive energy just doesn't hold the line. Actually, there's not much energy anymore, but they don't hold the line. They didn't hold the line in reference to force the vote. They didn't hold the line in reference to the infrastructure bill. They didn't hold the line in reference to the 15-minute minimum wage. So I think that there were multiple opportunities where they could have used some type of leverage. Listen to what Cenk says.
So I think that rationality dictates that you have to understand the distinction between primaries and general elections. So the establishment says you shouldn't have primaries, especially on the Democratic side. You should just bow your head. Whoever's in charge, they get to dictate who should be the leader. And you progressives are rascals. You're so unruly. You must obey, right? If you listen to that, you're nuts. That is them totally brainwashing you. There should be.
He said the establishment says that we should not have primaries. But who's the they, right? That's corporate America and the military industrial complex. That's who owns the parties. They're the ones making that decision. That's Goldman Sachs. That's Wells Fargo. That's Blue Cross Blue Shield. That's Lockheed Martin. That's who the they is. Right? So why would you still try to participate in a party that is controlled by those entities? That's the question to ask. Watch
a
this.
Massive primary against Joe Biden. Poll out today, 72% of Americans think that he is not mentally capable of running again, that he's too old. 72%. And the lunatics in the Democratic Party and the lunatics in Washington go, yeah, we should run a guy that 72% of the country doesn't think can be president against Donald Trump. They say this is the most important election of our lifetimes, but let's run an addled, wounded antelope against this demagogue fascist. How does that make sense? That doesn't make any sense at all. There's just their lust and their greed for power is unbearable. So that's the primaries. And in the primaries, Marianne is at this point clearly the best candidate. It's not even close, okay? But as you see there's one thing I wanted to quickly correct, because in my opinion, I don't think the Democratic Party has much power at all. So they set the debates, they set this, they set that. I understand that, but they don't rig votes. They just set all the context. And I hate the rules that they set, and I think they're deeply corrupt. But that's
let me chime in here for just a second. He's saying that they don't have much power. Their donors do. The donors have power. That's why we don't have health care for everyone. That's why we don't have a Medicare for all, because of the pharma donors that a lot of the politicians in the Democratic Party have. Democrats and Republicans take money from Blue Cross Blue Shield and Aetna and Cigna. Something to think about. Notice how he just glosses over, well, yeah, they set some of the rules. Like, that's not something to gloss over about. I don't like the rules that they set, but that's not going to change. That's not going to change. You cannot sit here and pretend like these rules are not a problem. They are a problem. It is a problem. Regardless if he thinks that Marianne is the best candidate running in the Democratic primary, none of that matters when the DNC can just change the rules whenever they want. None of that matters when they say that they're going to take delegates away from her and RFK Jr. and give it to Joe Biden. None of that matters. None of that matters when they say that they're not going to let them debate Joe Biden. They've already selected their candidate. There is no primary. None of that matters, Cenk. That's the problem. Let's continue.
It's not the number one problem. The number one problem is media. If Marianne Williamson got the same amount of respect and coverage in the media as Joe Biden did, Donald Trump, Vivek Ramaswamy gets, then Marianne would be in a real contest with Joe Biden. But the media freezes her out, shames anyone who supports. Oh, she's not serious. Like, you morons are serious? You've ruined this country.
And who owns the media? The same people that own the Democratic Party. It's the same people. You don't have to look far. So that's the thing. We can blame the media as much as we want to, but it's important that we point to the people who are above them that own the media and control the narrative and tell them what they can and cannot discuss. Cenk Uygur knows this because he worked in corporate media. He worked at MSNBC. So it's not like he doesn't realize this. That's why he started the Young Turks. Was because of the pushback that he received in reference to wanting to criticize Barack Obama on some of his foreign policy and domestic policies. And MSNBC wasn't trying to have that. So that's why he left, and that's why he created the Young Turks, where he could talk freely about those things. So it's like, yes, we get it. The media is not being fair to all these political candidates. Totally get it. But they're owned by the same people that own the Democratic Party. Got to make the connection.
But yes, when you get to a general election and somebody's sitting at 3% and the other two guys are sitting at 40%, well, brothers and sisters, I love you, but there is a reality that you are, in fact, taking a vote that would be against Donald Trump, and you're putting it in a category that is not going to win, and you all know that. I'm not saying today.
And you telling people to vote for Marianne or RFK Jr. while they are running in the Democratic Party as primary challengers, you are also putting people in a category that you know they're not going to win. You know the DNC is not going to let Marianne win. You know they're not going to let RFK Jr. in. Cenk's trying to make it seem like all you got to do is come out and vote. There's a thing called super delegates. That's why we need to get away from the Democratic Party. Get out of that. Get out of that. At the end of the day, they have the final say when it comes to a primary. Do people not get this? Do people not understand that Bernie Sanders, regardless of getting every county in West Virginia, the super delegates at the end of the day were the ones that made the decision, decided to give it to Hillary Clinton? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many people come out and support and vote for Marianne or RFK Jr. in the Democratic primary. The super delegates at the end of the day have the final say, and they are just as much corrupt and just as much controlled as the entire freaking party. By the same establishment that Cenk told you earlier in this interview that you need to push back against.
Hey, I'm saying if you get to election day, and the polling still shows that, and don't give me this crap about, I don't believe in polling. I think 3% could magically turn into 51%. But if on that day, your candidate's definitely not going to win, why would you help Trump? Why? Why would you help him?
Well,
it just makes...
Your candidate is also not going to win. So you see what's happening here? And this is exactly what I told you they would do. TYT at the end of the day is going to tell you to support Joe Biden, or if they replace it with Gavin Newsom, they're going to tell you to support that person. And this is exactly why the progressive movement didn't succeed, because they never held the line. If the answer is just to turn it over to the establishment that they told you to fight back against, then there's never going to be any progress in this so-called progressive movement. You'll always end up caving to the establishment. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of money, and it's a waste of resources. And we don't have a lot of resources on the left. And JP and I have talked about this earlier. The left has little resources. We don't have a lot to go around. They got a lot of resources on the right, boo. They have a lot of money on the right. We ain't got it like that on the left. But people are wasting their money on bullshit like this. Bernie Sanders raised over $100 million. And where did it go? If it was really about helping the people, why not raise $100 million and build clinics in some of these neighborhoods that are run down? Why not take that $100 million and build homes for people if you're really about helping the people?
No rational sense to
Let me ask you this, Cenk. Why would the Democratic Party ever stop? You don't want to characterize it as rigging. I will. Rigging the primary, disallowing a primary. Why would the media ever stop putting its finger on the scale the way that it does? If voters ultimately validate that behavior by continuing to vote blue no matter who, no matter how bad the Democratic Party gets, and no matter how corrupt the DNC is, when does it stop?
Yeah, it stops when we win the goddamn primary. And by the way, that's
There you go. There's your answer, folks. It stops when we win the primary. You are not going to win the primary with all those other forces at play. You're not going to win the primary in a party that is corporate and is controlled unless that progressive candidate sells out and becomes a part of the establishment. It's just, I'm sorry, this is a waste of money and a waste of resources. We got to stop this. I've been telling you guys this for a while. But people who still believe, well, let's just go and do it and try. And then have you removed these donors? Have you removed corporate money from electoral politics? Do we have free, publicly financed elections? Until that is the case, for the people like Crystal and Kyle that push back and say, don't do third party because we don't have ranked choice voting. Why the fuck are y'all still trying to run people in the Democratic Party as a progressive and we don't have free, publicly financed elections? As long as the corporate money is attached, nothing is going to change. So the Democratic Party isn't going to change for us. Those people who are running as so-called progressives, they're going to change for the party.
It's impossible. No, it's not. Bernie came this close in 2016, and he came this close in 2020. He won the first 3 states. And who stopped him? Was it the Democratic Party that stopped him? No, it was corporate media that then heaped tons of negative coverage on Bernie. Can we get past corporate media? Of course we can.
I know
it's super hard, and that's their wall that's meant to keep us out, right? But look at us. You're doing it on Rising. We're doing it on Young Turks. And all of us are getting past it by having these conversations and having it reach the American people. Can a progressive win a primary? Absolutely.
Let me pause here for a second. So Cenk is lying. Bree's going to correct him. Cenk is lying here. You know why? He's telling you that the reason why Bernie didn't win is because of mainstream media. Did mainstream media prevent Bernie from winning in Nevada, New Hampshire, also Iowa, which we found out later on? Did mainstream media prevent Bernie from winning in those states? No, it didn't. Yes, mainstream media was a factor and there were smears, but actively there were Democratic key playmakers who stepped in to make people step down. And that was Barack Obama. And Barack Obama also wanted Bernie to step down. He called him too. How are you going to sit here and pretend like these things weren't happening behind the scenes when it was actually being told right in front of our face? It's not just because of the media. It's also because there are Democrat powers at play that may no longer, be in office anymore, but they are still very much involved. And they're turning the wheels behind the scenes. That is a Barack Obama. And there are many more like him.
But we need to have progressives who try and who bring us together on economic issues like Bernie did in 2016. And then I guarantee you victory. That's also what the book is about. I guarantee you victory in 2028.
Cenk, you don't think that the Democratic Party played a role in Obama calling the leading candidates, including Pete Buttigieg, who at that point had done better than Joe Biden, and asked him to drop out after the South Carolina win? You don't think that that's evidence that the Democratic Party is willing to do whatever it takes to consolidate around a non-progressive candidate?
Briahna, I don't disagree with you 1%. That's not what I'm saying. I know Obama did that. I know that the so-called moderate Democrats, who are actually corporate Democrats, coalesced. By the way, Elizabeth Warren has done many great things in her career. You cannot wipe that away. But her not coalescing with Bernie, both in 2016 and critically in 2020, cannot be forgiven. It was just when they coalesced.
But that was on purpose. And that's what I want people to understand. The way that Cenk talks about this, Elizabeth Warren choosing not to drop out Super Tuesday, that was on purpose so that Bernie would not get more support.
We have to coalesce. Anyways, but Briahna, what I'm saying is that was not the critical factor. Obama can get all of the corrupt Democrats together and all the corporatists together, and they can go, whoa. But if the media doesn't then smear Bernie and doesn't elevate Biden, it doesn't work. It's the media that's the critical part. The Democrats try to rig elections, but if the media didn't play along, that plot would not have worked at all. Bernie would have won the 4th primary state, and it would have been over.
Bernie Sanders would have never won South Carolina. And as someone who lived in South Carolina, I'm going to go ahead and debunk that. Cenk does not understand how politics, particularly in the Democratic Party, works in South Carolina. Jim Clyburn is very much beloved by a lot of people in South Carolina, particularly the African-American community. Don't ask me why. I never figured it out. But what Cenk doesn't understand is even without the media, all it takes is for someone like a Jim Clyburn to call this church, that church, that church, this fraternity, this sorority, and tell them we voting for Joe Biden. You don't need mainstream media to do that in South Carolina. Does he not understand how some of the most prominent figures, particularly in the African-American community, influence electoral politics? Does he not understand the power of the Black church? The Black sororities, the Black fraternities? Jim Clyburn got all those people on speed dial, boo. He don't need mainstream media to do that. This is the piece that I think is especially important, that I think that a lot of times some of the other, like the white leftist channels, they don't really understand. They don't understand how this works in the Black community. So I'm explaining it to you right now. Some of the people who are in big with those fraternities and those sororities, and particularly in the Black church, they already got the support from those organizations. And sometimes that's all you need. So if you have the support from those organizations, it doesn't matter what mainstream media is telling people in South Carolina. They're going to listen to what Jim Clyburn tells them to do. And the churches and the fraternities and sororities, they know Jim Clyburn better than they know Bernie Sanders. So if Jim Clyburn says you're going to support Joe Biden, not this Bernie Sanders, that's what people are going to do. That's what Cenk doesn't understand. I said it early on in 2020 when Bernie started to run in the primary, and I told my friends, Bernie Sanders is not going to win South Carolina. I lived there, I know. Let's go on.
We were so close. My problem with progressives in Congress is we got near the goal line, and now they're going backwards. And they're going, oh, corporate Democrats, we bow our heads. We all endorse Joe Biden. Are you nuts? What are you endorsing Joe Biden for? He's a terrible candidate. He's a weak candidate. He's going to lose. He's not very progressive. And you endorse him without getting anything in return? Don't you know even elementary politics? Use your leverage, for Christ's sake. Guys, you've got to trust me on the numbers. We're going to win these primaries. And mainstream media gets weaker by the day, and we get stronger by the day. Those primaries are ours. It's just like even today, why don't we have a more forceful primary against Biden? Because while the media whines and complains about Biden, the minute that anybody steps in the race, they go, how dare you put your head to the leader? If you're a Democrat and you're a progressive, are you nuts listening to corporate media? No, do not ever listen to corporate media. Their job is to lull you back into sleep and make sure that you love the status quo and that you obey corporate rule. Do not do that. Go and fight in the primaries. It is not at all too late. Look, if these are the only choices we have, voting for Marianne Williamson in the primary is the biggest no-brainer a progressive should ever have. There's no reason in the world to vote for Biden. She's both a stronger candidate and a more correct candidate.
No reason in the world to vote for Joe Biden, but he's already told you in the general, if it's between, Biden and Trump, that's who you should vote for. You see, this is why the progressive strategy is so weak.
Cenk, let me ask you this before we go, and I'm sure you get into some of this in your book. I think you're so correct to rail against the mainstream media, the corporate media, and the choices that they make. And obviously we're part of a corporation, so I guess I can't say we're not corporate media, but we try to platform and celebrate alternative narratives like your own. But let me ask you this, because you went after Jimmy Dore a little bit a minute ago. I've noticed that in a lot of these independent and alternative media spaces, voices we've featured on the show before, people who got big by having very pro-Bernie Sanders audiences and messages, have had, if not a right-wing drift, I'm not sure that's in the direction of progressivism, or it's not in the direction of normal Bidenism either. It's in a direction, I think, of being more open to the right. People whose audiences, I think, have that perspective, like Glenn Greenwald's audience, Russell Brand's audience. We're going to be talking about Russell Brand later today for anyone watching this right now. That kind of thing. How does that square with your thesis on the inevitable takeover of progressivism?
Yeah, there's a couple of things there. Number one, people are getting so frustrated with the Democratic Party because they almost never deliver that they're looking for alternatives. I mean, look, as a meta issue, that's why Trump won in 2016 in the first place. The country is so deeply anti-establishment, except no one on TV will ever tell you that because they are the establishment. They're not going to come on TV and go, hey, by the way, country, I'm going to end the gaslighting here. It turns out you guys all hate us. They're not going to say that, okay? So that is the absolute reality here. So, but when you get into the Jimmys of the world, there's audience capture and there's financial interests, and then some have just lost their minds, in my opinion, okay? And so, for example, Jimmy does a video that's pro-vaccine. It doesn't get a lot of views.
We're going to move forward because that's the COVID stuff. But we're actually going to get to the force the vote discussion.
Friends, what I do think that you're accurately describing a psychological phenomenon where if people are getting a lot of criticism and pushback, some of which they perceive to be bad faith, there is an inclination to spend more time with people who have been nicer. I'm not saying that's a moral choice, but it is an obvious psychological outcome. And does that mean that people within the left community should perhaps extend more grace to each other so that that doesn't actually happen? And the second, I would just want to ask you about, similar accusations, I feel I would be remiss not to bring up, that have been made about your network, Young Turks, about the $20 million of Katzenberg money that some people have argued changed the direction of TYT's coverage in a more liberal and less left direction.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll take it one at a time. Should people show each other more grace on the left? Absolutely. At the same time, you notice a phenomenon, it's okay to point it out. So it's okay for us to point out what Jimmy does with his videos is super obvious. It's one thing to criticize the Democratic Party. As you can tell from this interview, I do it very regularly and very forcefully. It's another thing to say the Republicans are okay. The Republicans are not okay. The Republicans are a disaster. The Republicans are much worse than the Democrats. Okay. Now,
so if you're admitting that the Democrats and the Republicans are not okay, why aren't you trying to push your audience towards getting outside of the duopoly and pushing for a third party movement in this country? Because when we talk about financial interests, and let's keep it real, to the point that he was making, we talk about financial interests because the financial interest in doing that is not great. I know, I can tell you from experience, the financial interest in telling your audience to leave both parties is not great. The financial interest in telling people to stay in the Democratic Party and continue to support them, even when they lie to the American people and that they're still establishment and you're supposed to be a progressive news network, the financial interests are great. Let's keep it real. They took $20 million from Jeffrey Katzenberg, and I'm going to be honest, but look, I don't see nobody trying to offer me $20 million. I don't see nobody trying to offer RBN, my Commerce RBN. I don't see nobody trying to offer us $20 million over to RBN. There's a reason for that. Look at what we talk about. They invested in you because they knew you would be a tool to keep people in the Democratic Party. They knew you would be a tool when it came to partisan politics. So think about that, people.
Now, on to the second issue. Yeah, so then people go and look around and they go, okay, well, the Young Turks got $20 million investment. Okay, now here's the things people don't know. People say Katzenberg was involved, no question. The amount he has is near microscopic. And by the way, we pay the money back. So I be honest, that's breaking news. We've never told anyone that, but we did. So
a debt that was owed. Let me tell you something. $20 million is not microscopic. Most people in this country will never see $1 million in their life. Most people in this country will never make 6 figures a year. There are people in this country making less than $30,000 a year. That's just like, what? Jeffrey Katzenberg, here, let me tell you what Gene Gates isn't going to tell you. You think Jeffrey Katzenberg just donated money to TYT? Jeffrey Katzenberg donated money to Nancy Pelosi. Jeffrey Katzenberg actually pushed to criminalize homeless people in Los Angeles, which not Jink, but what's the girl's name? Anna Kasparian actually supported. That's who they took money from. Don't look at me. I don't have no sponsors. And people offer, but ain't nobody ever offered me no damn $20 million. I know that much. You got to earn that money. And as he told you, they had to pay that money back.
So that has no influence on us. But most importantly, Briahna, people just make up that we went towards the right way or went towards the moderate Democrats. I mean, they call me like those that the lunatic fringe that follow Jimmy say we're establishment shills. They haven't watched one.
Notice how he uses the same vocabulary that mainstream media uses to talk about people who are further to the left, which is fringe. He's using the same vocabulary that was used to describe and actually criticize Marianne Williamson and RFK Jr., who he told you to support Marianne. He's using that same vocabulary that mainstream media uses, which is fringe. $20 million.
1 minute of the show. I mean, look at what the things I said to you before this question, right? Does it look like a 1% pro-establishment? But they will see that and go, aha, nail it, he's for Hillary Clinton. Well, look, I can't help you if you're not dealing with facts and logic. You can't show anything where we're in favor of Hillary Clinton.
Well,
no one fights harder in the primaries against corporate Democrats than TYT does, Young Turks does, and I do. I formed the Justice Democrats to fight against corporate Democrats, and we defeated them. There's nothing more practical and more real than what I did there in that instance.
I mean, I look at all the things that I've done. Did they really defeat them? They may have won the race, but in the end, those squad members ended up joining the corporate Democrats and doing what they do. Did they really defeat them in the end?
I think specifically one of the moments that I remember of TYT being characterized as no longer capturing the spirit of the Justice Democrats or what the Justice Democrats were supposed to do was the moment around Force the Vote, where there was a push for the elected squad members to take an adversarial relationship to the Democratic Party and Nancy Pelosi specifically, to withhold their votes for them the same way that we've now seen the Freedom Caucus model with withholding their votes for Kevin McCarthy at the beginning of this year, really testing the theory of how that would work and getting in return a number of concessions that I think we can all acknowledge would be amazing for the left to have achieved. And at that time, despite there being a poll that TYT put out of its audience, where a majority of the TYT audience seemed to support Force the Vote, the newscasters, the personalities on the show, were very much against it. And as I'm sure you can remember, that caused a significant rift down the left that persists in many ways. What do you say to that? I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, it's crazy. But thank you for bringing it up, because I'm happy to address it and try to clarify it the best I can. Guys, do I look like I don't want to force votes? Of course I do, right? And I tell every congressperson that's going into Congress for the first time, if they'll listen to me, I tell them, you have to create what the civil rights movement called good trouble. Now, that doesn't mean you go in wildly and flailing around doing impractical things, but it means you come up with a coordinated strategy, you then create good trouble, and then you put a spotlight on an issue where you are on the winning end of it, popularity-wise. So, for example, one of the things we did with Justice Democrats is as soon as AOC won, we did a sit-in in Nancy Pelosi's office. That put Green New Deal on the map, that put Sunrise Movement on the map, and in a lot of ways it reinforced Justice Democrats being on the map.
First of all, the Green New Deal came from the Green Party. AOC and Ed Markey and the rest of the Justice Democrats crowd, they co-opted something that was already created and they watered it down. That was tame compared to the legislation that the Green Party had.
I want you to take those kind of actions. But you have to actually use your mind and independent judgment as to which action to take. So force a vote.
Which action to take? Not with healthcare, folks.
Jimmy comes to me. Back then, we're still friends and allies. And I go, oh, look, it sounds like a pretty good idea. Okay, I definitely want to do something where we're forcing action, right? So what's your plan, Jimmy? He's like, well, we're going to force a vote and we're going to, get Medicare for all. I'm like, brother, I want Medicare for all. But you have to take steps. You have to take steps. If you go straight to Medicare for all, you have a 0% chance of it passing and you're going to waste the power and the leverage.
Cenk is gaslighting.
And who are you going to get as Speaker of the House? And he's like, I don't know. That's your strategy? No, I'm not going to agree with a moron who has no strategy, no plan, not at all practical. We could have forced a vote on $15 minimum wage, and we could have won that vote. But instead, the force the vote, we're like, yeah, well, you didn't do what I wanted. Okay, then I'm out. I'm not going to help you guys.
What Cenk fails to explain, and I don't want to say understand because he does understand, what he fails to explain to people is that they didn't want to force the vote on anything. The squad wasn't planning to force the vote on anything. That's the problem. And he's lying about the strategy of force the vote. Those of you that watched the force the vote, I watched all of that, the town halls, all the discussions, so I knew what it was about. And then also, too, this was a strategy straight from the DSA handbook, Democratic Socialists of America, for the newbies in the chat. This was a strategy straight from that handbook. AOC's a member of Democratic Socialists of America, so are other ones. So if you have a problem with the strategy, Cenk, shouldn't you have taken that up with DSA? He wouldn't do that, though.
To actually get the bills that we all want. Oh, come on, man, grow up.
No, so Cenk, I would point out that Kevin McCarthy is still Speaker of the House. The issue was not whether or not Nancy Pelosi would necessarily become Speaker. The left, people
Briahna,
like yourself. Wait a minute.
Who is going to replace Nancy Pelosi?
Cenk,
did you guys have a candidate? Who?
Cenk, if I could, the right-wing caucus got a number of meaningful concessions. Regardless
but that's not what we were going for, Briahna. That's exactly the problem. If they said, let's go for meaningful concessions, I would have been in. They said, we're going to get Medicare for all.
Cenk,
sure,
with all
we
due
are.
respect, your characterization of what happened, I think, is reflective of the lack of grace and communication that was happening among the left at the time. And I think if people had been less motivated by their personal animosities against each other, it seemed that Jimmy Dore, you've expressed some animosity toward him several times during our short conversation here. I do think if those personal animosities were not at play, maybe we could have been in a world where you were listening to myself, Crystal Ball, Kyle Kulinski, other figures on the Cornel West, Chris Hedges, who were also advocating for this and who were being very clear that there were any number of demands. I wrote an article in Current Affairs that set all of this out contemporaneously, so you can go back and look, that it wasn't this idea that we were going to hold the vote and magically get Medicare for all. And to the extent that that was your presumption.
Briahna,
notice how he continues to interrupt her. I noticed Kyle Kulinski did the same thing. This is something very common I've noticed in this space. A lot of these men, first of all, there's very few Black women in the space. They really like to overtalk us. They really do. It just, the disrespect. He interrupted her at least 3-4 times now. Kyle Kulinski did the same thing when she was having that conversation with him and Crystal, the constant, as if what you have to say doesn't matter. There's this constant need to just overtalk people. Now, I want to remind you, Cenk sat on and ranted for quite some time. He wasn't interrupted for the most part of all these rants that he's had while he's been on the show.
I do think that is a real problem with communication on the left.
See the rudeness? You see what I'm talking about? They all have that. By the way, they all do this. This isn't just a Cenk thing. I've experienced this as well. They all do it. This is how they think they can talk to you. This is really how they think they can talk to you. And another thing in reference to what Bree said about it being personal, she's right. Had it not been for the personal shit, the personality conflicts, we could have really got something here. But people let personal shit that happens in the background, and I've seen it myself, they let that get in the way of trying to start any type of movement or push for a policy or cause or any type of grassroots action. I've seen this happen multiple times. Personality conflicts. then I don't give a fuck. You ain't got to be best friends with people. I don't really care. Ain't nobody saying you got to be their bud or their bro or their pal. But you can't come together for this one thing, which is, that was your thing. Justice Democrats was his thing. You can't come together with other people to push these people who you told us all to support and vote for, to push them to do this DSA strategy. You can't do it because I don't like this person. I don't think some of these people really want any real progress. I think some of these people like things just the way that they are. They let too many things get in the way. Too many things. Now you're in the workplace and you may not like a coworker, but you guys have been put on a team. You're not going to come to work. Let's continue.
You guys wanted at the time. Name one other concession. At the time, don't make it up now. At the time, name one other thing you guys
I invite
wanted.
you and the rest of the audience to go look at an article I wrote in Current Affairs magazine in November of 2020, in which I consulted with David Sirota and included a list of subsequent ancillary demands that he had written up in his own publication. And I linked to them and say that these are also important. The important thing is that we need to demand something in exchange for our votes. But we don't need to rehash that. Go ahead. I'll give you the last.
No, I need to say one last thing, Briahna. I need to say one last thing. You guys make it sound like we're the ones who have animus. No, be clear about how this thing started. As I told you in the beginning, I said, well, that's interesting. Let's have a conversation about strategy. And the minute I said, let's have a conversation about strategy, Jimmy said that we were taking money from the CIA and Nancy Pelosi. You just mentioned David Sirota. He also attacked David Sirota. He also attacked Amy Goodman from Democracy Now! and insinuated she was working with the CIA. So then I thought, well, no, I'm not going to work with a lunatic who thinks that Amy Goodman might be working with the CIA. And second of all, I didn't start the fight. This lunatic comes in frothing at the mouth. I'm being funded by CIA and Nancy Pelosi. How are you supposed to have a rational conversation with an absolute lunatic like that? And then you guys think we started it? Are you insane?
I didn't say you started it. I don't care about the personalities. Cenk, you're talking about personalities. I'm talking about issues. All I know is that David Sirota supported Force the Vote. I had him on my podcast talking about it many times.
Really? We're going to show you if that's true or not. So he's saying that's not true about David Sirota. I have a clip to show you.
That's not true.
Yes, he did.
No,
and he
didn't.
continues to be an advocate that I value and respect a great deal. And he is able, as a mature person, to tease away his personal feelings about human beings that he might share an idea with or a strategy with, and the underlying strategy. And I really do hope that we see more of that on the left and less of a focus on who it is that's delivering a certain kind of a message, especially if you're right, Cenk, and it's going to require a united and powerful independent media force in order to actually ever get a progressive into office. Thank you so much for joining us today.
That is very true. That's the thing is there's a lot of focus on the personalities, and I've noticed that as well, and it's really annoying. Like, you can't organize a rally without people being like, you can't talk to that person. I don't want to be there. But what did David Sirota say? Let's pull this up. Shout out to Neoliberal Tears, because Neoliberal Tears has been doing the damn thing. This is just a take back. So Neoliberal Tears found this. Should Medicare for all be forced to a floor vote? Listen.
To me, what's frustrating is, okay, we force a vote, they go back into the caucus, but there's not a single progressive who would run against Pelosi. So where's the end game? Like, and David, not a lot of people might know this, and I don't blame them. I'm doing it sometimes publicly, sometimes I'm doing it behind the scenes, but I've asked progressives to run against Pelosi. I've done it, like I said, I've done it on the show, I've done it on social media, but I've also done it behind the scenes, and no one will.
That's a lie. Shahid Buttar has run against Nancy Pelosi 3 times. I mean, none of the members of the squad live in her district, so they can't primary challenge Nancy Pelosi. But Shahid Buttar has run against Nancy Pelosi 3 times. He's been on the show multiple times to talk about his races that he's had with Nancy Pelosi.
And so should we pressure them to? Yes, okay. But are they going to do it this time around? I think there's a 0% chance. To me, what's frustrating is, okay, we force a vote, they go back into the caucus, but there's not a single progressive who would run against Pelosi. So where's the end game?
He really messed up a lot of things during Force the Vote. He told people that if they did force the vote, then Kevin McCarthy would become speaker. He told, like, there's just so much stuff that I can't even get into all of it. But the thing is, and this is the point here that neoliberal tears also highlighted, he tries to deflect by asking Bree who progressives should nominated for speaker instead of Pelosi, missing the point on purpose because no one needed to be nominated as an alternative for the squad to have asked for something. And he's still telling that lie to people. We could have been forcing the vote for months, just like you saw the Freedom Caucus when they went back and forth about deciding whether or not they were going to support Kevin McCarthy as speaker without some type of concessions. They continued to go back and forth. We could have been doing that for months if need be. You did not have to have someone else lined up. And Cenk, he's been educated about this multiple times and he's continuing to tell that lie. So that's very suspect. But again, this just show you, like I said, that the progressive, this is why they don't hold the line and that's why you don't get anything.